Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Fearless Artist Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Lynne, and today I'm very pleased to have on my friend and colleague, Cory Barger from Practice Happier. Welcome, Cory.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I have been wanting to talk to you for a while because I love anyone who's helping musicians learn how to practice in a, as you would describe it, happier way. When I first finished grad school, I worked with a life coach for a number of years to help me overcome a lot of inner criticism, perfectionism, all of that really unhealthy stuff, which is what the Fearless Artist was born out of. So I'm excited to dive into your story today. And you have a course for helping musicians. So I would love to learn more about that and your
Yeah,
journey.
thanks so much for having me and what you said about talking to someone about all of these negative things that we learn. I think it's so important because there's so much in our training that ingrains this stuff into us, and it's really hard to come out from under it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So please, would you introduce yourself to our audience and tell us where you're coming from?
I'm Cory Barger. I am the principal bassoonist in the Philharmónica de Boca del Rio y Veracruz in Veracruz, Mexico, which is where I am coming to you from right now.
And I just learned that you studied in London for your master's degree. I would love to hear about your studies and then ultimately getting this orchestra position and when you started Practice Happier and why.
So I grew up in Southern California and I studied at UCLA. I studied the bassoon. And I felt I was in a little bit of a strange position because I'd never had lessons before I went to college. And I always felt like I was really behind. I started playing bassoon when I was 14. The flute was my first instrument. And I was one of those people that got kind of bored all the time with everything. So I switched from playing the flute, I played the oboe, I played the clarinet, I played the bass clarinet. And eventually someone handed me a bassoon and a fingering chart. And that's how I learned to play the bassoon.
Wow.
So needless to say, there were a lot of habits that I learned that were not very appreciated by my teacher, nor, you learn a lot of bad habits when you don't have any guidance. So
Mm-hmm.
I always felt like I was really behind all my peers. But then I learned that everybody thinks that, no matter what level of
Yeah.
preparation they're coming from. And I feel like that sort of experience was really formative in how I teach now because we always feel like we're so isolated in our heads in the struggles that we have, and we come to learn eventually that actually most people feel these things. Most people feel inadequate. Most people feel behind because that's what the culture is constantly telling us. When I was at UCLA, I got some really bad tendonitis injuries because I was practicing so much because I felt like I had to make up for being so behind. And I couldn't move my thumbs at a certain point,
Oh,
which is
geez.
really bad when you play the bassoon.
Yeah.
There's like 14 keys that your thumbs are responsible for. And so there was a point where I had to stop playing for 3 months. And it was like in between my second year jury and my third year recital. So obviously I was really panicked and wondering
Mm-hmm.
how on earth I was ever going to be able to like graduate and make this my career. I went to all these doctors that were like, oh, just stop playing. And I was like, no. So eventually I found an acupuncturist that really like turned things around for me. But luckily my body responds really well to acupuncture. And
Sure.
that got me to the point where I could play for 15 minutes a day. I still was going to the practice rooms with my friends. We had this ritual of all going to practice together at the end of the day, and I didn't want to be left out. So I would go with them and I would like wander the halls and be everyone's nightmare of the person who's listening while you're practicing. When I was wandering around, I noticed just how much time most of us are wasting. And I kept
Mm-hmm.
thinking like, oh, it would be a lot more effective if you did this or that thing instead of repeating this thing the same way over and over again. So I started to really notice how kind of outdated all of our ideas of skill acquisition are, the way that we learn things and how we learn them. So I started reading a whole lot about psychology and performance anxiety, and most of the studies that we have about like how we get better at things come from athletics. So there's a lot of details and research there from particularly like studies on Olympic athletes on how to get really good at stuff. So like that experience, while it was a horrible one, taught me so much about how to get more done in less time. And in the end, I played my recital and I got good grades and I graduated and I got a big scholarship to go to the Royal College of Music in London. And yeah, throughout that time, I was doing a lot of teaching, a lot of freelancing, and I got to the point where I could no longer live in England for reasons, and I had to move to California. And
Mm-hmm.
then
Mm-hmm.
eventually I got the opportunity to come down here to Mexico. I took it and I've been here for 7 years.
7 years in Mexico. Okay, I mean, thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing all that. That's incredible. And what a way to use something that was so awful to then essentially start listening to your colleagues, coaching them, noticing, making those observations of maybe the unnecessary repetitions that they were doing that ultimately
Hmm.
led to your injury. and then finding smarter ways to work. I mean, it's incredible. Um,
Yeah, because like 85% of orchestra musicians will have an injury at some point in their career that will stop them from playing. And that's
yeah,
a huge number of people. That study
that's
was
insane.
done in like, I think 2004. But the numbers aren't really changing very much. And from what I see in students and colleagues, there really isn't any change. And a lot of that has to do with the culture that we're in as well. Just this
Yep,
constant pressure to never be behind.
right. Yeah. So why practice happier, and what does that mean to you?
That's funny that you should ask because I just was talking to one of my followers the other day about this. And I posted a meme that was a little bit of like a kind of a dark humor thing. And they commented, like, it's ironic that an account that's called Practice Happier posted this thing. And I was like, well, there's a reason that it's called Practice Happy because
Okay.
I don't want this to be like a toxic positivity sort of space.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are a lot of things that kind of make me believe that happy is a long way off.
So what were you noticing in your colleagues, clients that you came up with? Okay, I just want to make everybody a little bit happier with their practicing.
Well, a lot of times just getting started is something that people have a huge problem with
Okay.
because the time that we have, say that you go in and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to practice for 3 hours or something.
Yeah.
That's very intimidating, and a lot of people will procrastinate doing that. So just being able to like get over the hump, getting yourself into the practice room is pretty hard. So thinking about like how you motivate yourself. And I noticed that a lot of people do that very negatively. And the more I learn about motivation, the more I realize that it's about like how much dopamine you have available in your brain. It's not any kind of like moral anything. So um, finding little tiny ways to make the task more pleasant. And that's partly what
Okay.
Practice Happier came from. Is in my course, there are quite a few lessons about just like tiny actions that you can take to make that time a little bit more pleasant. And
Okay.
whether
Can you
that's
unpack
like,
this a little bit? Because I'm like totally
yeah,
resonating with this because I also was like, okay, I'm flying in this morning, but this afternoon I'm going to practice 2 hours because I'm desperately behind on some upcoming programs. And of course, I
mm,
had a nap and I did not practice.
I would say the nap was a better use of your time.
Right.
But then
Possibly.
anxiety is going to come in and tell you, oh my God, no, I need to spend this time practicing. But
Yeah.
actually, sleep is extremely useful for making sure that your brain is getting rid of all of the useless things that it doesn't need. So when we practice, um, basically our brains are kind of editing what we've been doing all the time.
Mm.
And when we give our brain the time to rest and actually like clear the cache, delete all the stuff that we don't need, delete all those mistake repetitions that we may have had, then we come back the next day with things being a bit tidier. If we don't give ourselves that time, then all of those things are kind of like just muddied up in there. So
Yeah.
it's very difficult for us to have a clear choice of what it is that we do want. So
Yeah,
that's one of
that's
the
good.
reasons that practice can tend to be frustrating for people because in that way you might not see results. So take more naps,
I
and
love it.
even just like a tiny amount of rest. Like I will take a break after like 4 or 5 minutes of really repetitive practice and just let
Hmm.
my mind do nothing, so that
Mm.
my brain has a moment to just like make whatever connections that it needed, process that information that I just gave it because I just gave it a lot of information
I
and
just read that recently too,
space.
that from a study, yeah, that you need to give yourself that space to
Hmm.
process what you just did. But so many musicians will just like repeat like 10 times in a row, mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's what I heard from my colleagues and my friends in the times that I was stalking them in the practice room.
So when you're
But
saying
yeah,
make it marginally happier to practice, you said making it easier to get started. Can you unpack that a little bit?
yeah, there's a lot of ways that we can do that. And some of them are what you would think of as kind of cosmetic. But I like to, like, if I'm at home, I have a candle that I light when I practice because your scent memory is really strong and it helps
Okay.
to, like, bring you to a particular mental state. And I know that when I smell that smell, it's time to get to work. And my brain is just like, okay, fine, let's go do this. Um, just sorts of things that make you feel happier. Coffee, whatever makes your environment feel a little bit better. But on a more like practical side, actually giving yourself a schedule for what you're doing helps a lot because when we look at that like 2 or 3 hour block of practice as like, I'm going to start and see where we go, it's very
Yeah.
overwhelming for our brain. And it means that we have to do a lot of really small decision making in the moment if you're having a hard time getting started practicing. make yourself a plan of like 4 or 5 goals that you have before, like even, like the day before that you're going into practice. And you don't always have to stick to that, but having that laid out, saying like, okay, I'm going to work on letter A to C in the first whatever, and I'm going to polish measure 365, and like very, very specific goals so that your brain has something to grab onto. And it's going to make it a lot easier to go into that time without feeling like it's an overwhelming, amorphous thing.
I get that. I mean, and I totally hear you. Where I find I get stuck is I'll go too in the weeds. But like so today, like I've got a bunch of upcoming programs for some of the rep I don't know at all, and then some of it I know, but it's really hard. So then I'll start working, and then I get stuck in the technical aspect. Like I need to do this detailed work, and
Yeah.
I told myself I would only spend 30 minutes on the entire thing because I just need to do like a scrape of an overview. And in the meantime, I find myself in like 3 bars in movement 5 going over and over and over.
And what's your mental state in that moment? Is it calm or is it a little bit panic?
Yeah, totally. Like I got to get
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I find as well, is that like even if we don't really feel that upset, making mistakes, being on the spot, feeling like we have a deadline puts us in fight or flight. And that means that we're not thinking the same as if we weren't. And a lot of times we'll go on stage and be in fight or flight mode. And what happens when this gets activated is that the blood in your brain is not traveling to the same places that it would normally be. If you're calm when you're practicing, you're using like your logical mind to solve the problems. You're using like we use basically every part of the brain when we practice, which is why like music is generally recommended for so many people to stay mentally active, right? So when we're in fight or flight, most of the blood goes to like the back of our brain, where like instinctual part of our brain, instead of the front part of our brain where the logic is running everything. We might feel some danger on stage, but that same reaction is still happening in our brain, and we're not aware that it's happening. So in those moments, we get into this really repetitive kind of like flow state of fear, and it's hard to get out of it, and it's exhausting for us, and it's not very productive. So in those moments, I would actually stop myself. Once I become aware of the fact that I'm not thinking very clearly, I would stop and move on to something else. And that's one of the reasons that I tell people to like set timers in practice and actually stop when the timer is up, because you may not be thinking as clearly as you think you are.
Yeah. No, that's good. Can you give us an overview of the course and how it's set up?
Yeah, it's well, there's actually 2 options to how the course is set up. It's originally planned out as 6 weeks with individual lessons each day. I think of it as kind of like the stages of learning a piece. You start
Okay.
off and you are slowly learning these smaller skills that you then can build up into what you would need to go on stage. And the other option is to attack your more specific problems directly rather than going through more gradually. So, say, for example, your problem is that you feel really terrible about yourself. You can go through all these specific lessons to help you build your confidence. And if you feel like you are struggling with your motivation, you can go directly to the section about motivation. Whereas if
Okay.
you see the course in its entirety, you would get all of these little bite-sized lessons and eventually come out as one. Like you would eventually have the goal of more confidence, better motivation, all of these things in without feeling like you're very specifically tackling those things.
So you're mentioning, if somebody's struggling with lack of motivation, they can specifically go to that place in the course. Is there also
Yeah.
something around imposter syndrome? Because we get people asking about that all the time.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that I see all the time with my clients too. Imposter syndrome is really insidious. And yes, like my lessons about confidence, I think are really designed to deal with that. But I think
Can
imposter syndrome particularly comes really mostly from the culture around us. So
Okay.
there's a whole lot of work that we need to do as musicians, as leaders, to deal with how imposter syndrome is affecting all of us.
Yeah. What are some first steps for someone struggling with imposter syndrome? Like, how do you help them start to unpack this? Because everyone wants a fast solution. Like, help me learn
Yeah.
and to stop feeling like an imposter.
Yeah. My favorite way to approach this is to ask who benefits from me feeling like this. And so like not see yourself in a position, or like not seeing people like you in a position of leadership, means that when you get to a position of leadership yourself and you look around, you're like, what am I doing here? And I feel like that's really the biggest driver of imposter syndrome.
I know you have a workbook that comes with the course, and there's a lot of great questions in there to help reflect. Like, what are some of the more effective reflection questions that you see to help people struggling with that?
With imposter syndrome and confidence in general, I would want you to notice what kinds of thoughts you're having.
Hmm.
So usually we'll get some sort of panic reaction when we're feeling like an imposter, like particularly if you're preparing for a recital and you feel like you're not good enough. And I want to know what kinds of thoughts that you're having about why you're not good enough, what it is that you have picked up over the years about why you're not good enough, what makes you believe that. Write all of those things down and then come up with like basically litigate this against yourself. Be like, okay, here's these reasons that I feel like I'm not good enough. What kind of evidence that I can I find that is the opposite of that? Basically, what is everything
Hmm.
that's not that? And when you start to a lot of times people will initially be like, there is no evidence that I am good enough. I am absolutely not good enough. There's nothing that I can tell you that would say that I am. And then we have to really like dig a little bit deeper and say, okay, is there anything that you're good enough at?
Hmm.
Whatever it is that helps you to kind of like grab onto that feeling. And we want to steal that feeling. So think about what it is that you feel like if you feel like you belong somewhere. What does it feel like if you're confident about something? What does
Hmm.
it feel like if you are accepted? Like I'm sure that you've heard about like Beyonce's alter ego Sasha Fierce
Yeah.
and how like that having that externalized, maybe not even externalized, but basically like that other side of you that
Yeah.
has this confidence. What would it be like if I were actually confident? And then spend some time like sitting with those emotions, sitting with like
Hmm.
what it feels like to have that be you. And then like slowly of the experience of you going into the practice room feeling like that for like 30 seconds at a time and slowly build that up until you kind of break the association that you have with the imposter syndrome.
Yeah. I mean, I like that. I've talked before about like flipping into stage Michelle when I go on performances. So maybe there's a way to take
Yeah.
stage Michelle into the practice room because
Yeah. That's
like
something that I
keeping.
do a lot with people. Like, I think that a lot of the things that we do to prepare ourselves for a performance are left much too late in our preparation. If we could do those things, if you could bring stage Michelle to the very first day of practicing something, then you would see a lot of benefits, I think.
Yeah, because there's an authority there that comes in. There's a confidence that comes in because the stage version has prepared and has the energy and the excitement and wants to share with the audience. So
Yeah.
I love that bringing that into the practice room. Actually, Angela Miles Beeching talked about that too, and she was on the podcast recently about how can we create that sense already behind doors that when you go out there, you've already prepared, you've already imagined that feeling, that energy, that outward
Yeah.
shift.
And a lot of times in practice, we think that we have to be prepared for any situation. But
Yeah.
what we really need to do is prepare ourselves to feel the way we want to feel and to be able to like take that emotion and teach our body what it is that we want to experience so that we
Hmm.
can more effectively experience it later.
That's good. So I'm just curious to go back to you making it easy because I know that also comes from James Clear, Atomic Habits. Make it easy, make it fun. That's like the basics of habit building, habit stacking.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I get the candle, I get the, even wearing a specific outfit or something to give yourself
Hmm.
the energy. Because I know if I have a
Yeah.
rehearsal outside the home, I show up in a very different state, energy state, than if I have to just walk down the stairs and start practicing. So I've been thinking about
Yeah.
that too. Like, okay, how can I shift into like higher energy mode? But if you have like a sheer crazy amount of rep to learn and you do have a deadline, because I know you said earlier, don't go into this panic, fight, or flight state. But is there a way to practice calmly when you know there's still this looming deadline? Like, how do you help your clients with that?
Yeah. So first you have to get yourself of the panic. And usually when we're in panic, we're not very good at making decisions. We feel like, okay, my time is best spent like drilling these three measures.
Hmm.
And it might not actually be because the mindset that you're in is not allowing you to think clearly. It's not allowing you to make decisions very clearly. And it's not really allowing you the level of coordination that you would really expect yourself to have. And I think there's a fine line on this because a lot of us do go on stage in fight or flight. So, like, if you're in that, a lot of learning is dependent on the mental state that you're in.
Hmm.
Um, so, like, eventually, my goal is to help us not be in fight or flight so often.
Hmm.
And there are a lot of ways that you can balance your nervous system. One of my favorites is an exercise that you can do anywhere, and it stretches your vagus nerve a little bit. The vagus nerve is the nerve that connects your brain to the rest of your body. So a whole lot of information travels there all the time. And so if you keep your head straight forward and you move your eyes all the way to one direction, in a moment you'll either yawn, swallow, or sigh. And for me, I yawn almost immediately doing this. Once you get that, go back to the middle and then rest for a second and go move your eyes to the other side and wait for the yawn, swallow, or sigh. That yawn, swallow, or sigh is basically a sign that your body's just given itself a little bit of a reset.
You know what? I learned
Yeah.
that on TikTok from a woman who was helping binge eaters, because
Mm,
that's something that I had to overcome too. And she was talking about how to reset your nervous system so that you're not in this frantic binge eating, because you get into like this
yeah.
kind of stormy fog. And so she was talking about the vagus nerve, and she also talked about
Yeah.
kind of rubbing the side of your neck to help relax as well. And it's what you
Hmm.
said when she said you yawn, that's when you know you've reached it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly what's happening when we're in the practice room. When we're in that like crazy mode of drilling things, we are not thinking clearly.
Yeah. No, I know, because like our thoughts are so powerful, and it really comes down to what we believe about ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are. I mean, what you're saying about imposter syndrome, if you don't believe that you belong there, then you're going to not act like you belong there, or you'll be
Exactly.
surprised you don't know how to be because you've never seen anyone in that position. And it just reminds me of, before I started the Fearless Artist, I was watching women motivational speakers, women preachers for years on Instagram. I was listening to their podcasts, and I never planned to have a podcast for myself or to have, a TFA, but
Hmm.
I think seeing these women on stage with microphones, I'm like, yeah, I know what that looks like. They're so bold. They're
Yeah.
so cool. They speak with authority. And so I think a
Yeah.
lot of that has taught me how to do it instinctively, just from
Yeah. Yeah.
watching.
And that's so powerful. And that's why representation is so important. Diversity is so
Yes.
important because
Yes.
like if you don't see yourself in that position, or if you don't see people like you in that position, it's hard to imagine yourself there.
So
Yeah.
making your space comfortable, speaking. I know you have affirmations also in your workbook, kind of
Hmm.
rewiring what you're saying about yourself, having
Yeah.
a plan in place. So like all of this kind of like groundwork in order to actually, when you sit down, make better decisions around where to spend your time practicing, right?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Because then you've set yourself up a bit better for success. Like say you're planning your practice and you're really stressed. Okay, I'm going to play this. I'm going to be really focused for half an hour. And then I'm going to do this. And I'm going to be extremely focused for another half an hour. It's not actually likely that you are going to be focused for an hour. Just the
Hmm.
physiological reality of things is our focus wanes. Knowing how much time you generally have in focus can be helpful, but a lot of things will affect like stress, tiredness, whether you ate recently or not, is all going to be affecting how your focus is. So when we're making plans and we're thinking about like the perfectionist version of ourselves, that's setting us up for failure. And we end up generally just kind of feeling terrible about ourselves when we're done because we haven't accomplished the 47 things that we said that we were going to. And
Yeah, I mean, the happier thing is really, really great. Do you have any testimonies of students who have done your course, or like fun stories that have come back about people seeing changes?
well, one of my clients recently won an audition, so that was very
Ah,
exciting for
awesome.
um like we bring those experiences with us into the practice room and on stage, and it creates just so much pressure that then it becomes almost impossible to get to work because we feel like we can't live up to the pressure. And yeah, they managed to get themselves into a practice schedule and they won their audition and they love their position.
Amazing. That's
Yeah,
awesome. So I
yeah.
like that you're emphasizing they got into a practice schedule that worked for them, because I think that's the whole
Mhm.
point of the course, is to teach the process of preparation, right?
It doesn't necessarily need to be something that is the same all the time. Like
Mhm.
we think of practice as a one size fits all kind of thing. Like, oh, if you're not practicing for 4 hours, then you're not like getting anything done. Like how many of us have heard this from teachers? What we do with the time is so much more important than how much time there is.
Right.
And generally, like knowing yourself, knowing what your cycles of focus are like, knowing what helps you to get into flow, knowing what helps you to enjoy what it is you're doing is so much more powerful than thinking that you have to beat yourself into the practice room all the time.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's really what my work is all about, like small changes that you can make that have larger impact than you would think.
So this course, you would say, is for people who are having a hard time practicing, or perfectionists, or people who are too hard on themselves, or people who are on the verge of burnout, or have had to switch their practice techniques because of injury. Anyone
Yeah.
else that it speaks to?
Just anybody who wants to get more done in less time.
Yeah.
So even you don't need to be somebody who's like on the edge of burnout to want to get more done, I think.
Hmm.
I hope that it doesn't turn into some kind of like productivity war among people, but to make sure that we have more time to just, like go out and live our lives. Like if you're tired of being stuck in a practice room all the time and not seeing the results that you want to see, then this is the course for you.
Awesome. Okay, well, I mean, you so generously have given our audience a discount code. It's Fearless, and when they go to the link and sign up, they'll get a free one-on-one with you.
Yeah.
As when they buy the course. So, guys, if you go check out the course, you can put in the code word Fearless, and you'll get a one-on-one with Cory. She'll talk you through anywhere that you're getting stuck with your practicing. I have the course. I love working through it. The workbook has been helping me a lot because it's asking different questions to help you reflect. So definitely go check it out. Cory, where can we find you? How can we follow you?
You can find me on Instagram at Practice Happier. Sometimes I'm also on TikTok, but I post much more on Instagram.
Okay,
And
nice.
my website is practicehappier.com.
Perfect. And we always finish with an action point. So if everybody listening can do one thing after this episode, what would you recommend that they do?
Next time you're practicing, take a moment to notice whether you're actually panic practicing or not. And then do that side eye exercise that I just mentioned, where you move your eyes to one side to reset your nervous system, and then take a selfie and tag us.
Yes, that's great. Actually, I like that. I'm going to do that too. So tag Practice Happier, tag the Fearless Artist Mastermind, of course, on Instagram. Thanks everybody for listening. Make sure you go follow Cory on the socials, and we'll see you next time on the podcast. Be fearless.
Thank you.